hostage deal brokered by two administrations, the goodbye speech from the Oval Office, and the new wind warnings in Southern California. That's Topping the Hill on NewsNation tonight. It is 1 o'clock in the morning in Israel, dinner time here in D.C., and 3 o'clock in the afternoon in Southern California. And there are major developments all over the world at this moment. A ceasefire and hostage deal in the Middle East. President Biden describing it as a permanent end to the war between Israel and the foreign terrorist organization, Hamas.
At long last, I can announce a ceasefire and a hostage deal has been reached between Israel and Hamas. I'm proud to say Americans will be part of that hostage release in phase one as well.
The first hostages could be released just hours before Donald Trump resumes the Oval Office and just days after he made this vow.
If they're not back by the time I get into office, all hell will break out in the Middle East.
In just 2 hours, President Biden will give his farewell address to the nation. And for several hours earlier today, some of Trump's top cabinet picks, including those who could run the State Department, Justice Department, and CIA, faced questions up on Capitol Hill. And a live look in Los Angeles County, the warnings for dangerous winds extended as the Palisades and Eaton fires are just 19 and 45% contained. Hello, good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Blake Berman. This is The Hill on NewsNation. Our Brian Enton is back live in Southern California this evening. Joe Khalil on what Trump's top picks revealed today. But we begin with our Robert Sherman, who spent a better part of the year in Israel, who is live with us on what he is learning about this hostage deal. That Robert, we are learning tonight, broken up into three phases, and still Benjamin Netanyahu saying some of the final details are still being worked out. Is that right?
Yeah, especially when it comes to exactly what IDF withdrawals would necessarily look like. And there is going to be a procedural aspect to all of this, Blake, with a security cabinet vote that would take place. So that's one element that needs to be addressed. But if all of this goes according to plan, which U.S. officials seem to be confident of, you will see 33 hostages coming out in a span of 6 weeks. Among them, 2 Americans, according to senior administration officials. That would include Keith Siegel and Sagi Dekel Hen. One other American that we know of, Idan Alexander, is not supposed to be in that first group, but American officials insisting that they will do everything in order to get all of these Americans home. In exchange for the release of hostages, there will be Palestinian prisoners released and the flooding of aid into the Gaza Strip. That's phase one. Phase two is where Israelis are a little bit more concerned about exactly where all of this goes. That's the negotiations about what Gaza will look like after the war is over. Israelis are very worried that there's a situation and Hamas still controls the Gaza Strip and poses a security threat, a non-starter for the Israeli war cabinet. The president-elect says that when he takes office, all of the implementation of this deal will be under him. He will ensure that Gaza does not become a terrorist state again. But that is where Israelis, especially those hostage families, have concerns. And one more point to make here, Blake. In phase one of that deal, 33 hostages are coming out, but it's still estimated that there are about 100 hostages in total inside of Gaza. And we're hearing from some of those hostage families that are very worried that if this deal does not progress step by step, is the way that it needs to over the next few months, that they're worried that things could fizzle out before their loved ones come home. So much more work still to be done, but a start that is promising for many. Blake?
Our Robert Sherman live for us tonight. Robert, thank you. And coming up here on the Hill, I'll speak with Ronan and Orna Nutra. Their son, Omer, an American-Israeli citizen, was killed by Hamas. Their reaction to today's news in about 15 minutes later here on the Hill. Well, as that news broke, several of President-elect Trump's top cabinet selections were testifying up on Capitol Hill. John Radcliffe for CIA, Marco Rubio, likely to be the next Secretary of State, giving their views of how they see the world and potential threats.
If we stay on the road we're on right now, in less than 10 years, virtually everything that matters to us in life will depend on whether China will allow us to have it or not. Everything from the blood pressure medicine we take to what movies we get to watch and everything in between.
Our Joe Khalil joins us live. Joe, obviously Pam Bondi up there as well. But as this big news was breaking internationally, Marco Rubio is going to be most likely the next Secretary of State. John Radcliffe, CIA. These are going to be two of the biggest players in the Trump administration on the foreign, really, and domestic policy front. Yeah. What did we learn about them, sort of how they view the world right now?
So Rubio addressed this directly. He said, both administrations deserve credit, but he talked about the key to peace when it comes to that ceasefire deal being with Saudi Arabia. That is going to be part of the Trump doctrine, is trying to empower Saudi Arabia to sort of be a caretaker in Gaza and to partner them with Israel, to forge an alliance. They haven't always been close, but they've been warming to each other, and he thinks that is the way that you get a lasting peace there. More broadly, he talked a lot about China. Yeah. Obviously, threats from Russia and Iran, but he said we have to wake up to the fact that China is not just an economic competitor, it's a military competitor, it's a science competitor, it's everything. They're going to have their hands in everything. So very much we heard America first, and we heard that echoed by Radcliffe as well. He said that we've got to open our eyes to the fact that China is our biggest adversary, but that China, Iran, Russia often working in unison together. And he ended with saying one way to start that is to get partisanship out of the CIA, out of the intel community.
He also made comments, too, about artificial intelligence, AI, and the CIA, and basically said that they need to catch up on that front, which was fascinating to hear from him. Joe Khalil, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Live look right now, by the way. 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue over at the White House. In his final days in office, President Biden set to give his farewell address to the nation, which you can watch right here tonight on NewsNation, 8 o'clock Eastern. The incoming president, Donald Trump, will now suddenly have two new big challenges before him: seeing all three of the ceasefire phases through and helping thousands of Californians rebuild. A live look in Los Angeles County tonight is the Palisades fire there, just 19% contained. The Eaton fire, just 45% contained, and the National Weather Service says that it is extending its dangerous wind warnings. Joining me now is Senator Ron Johnson, Republican from the state of Wisconsin, member of the Homeland Security, Budget, and Finance Committee. Senator, thanks for being back with us tonight here on the Hill.
I am. Thanks for having me back.
You got it. So let's start with the big news of the afternoon globally. This was the ceasefire and the hostage deal. President Biden, the current commander-in-chief, but lots of input from Donald Trump and his team as well. This is now going to fall, Senator, on the incoming Trump administration to see it through. And Donald Trump had talked about there could be, quote-unquote, all hell to pay if the hostages weren't returned by his inauguration. Now that this is going to be sort of his deal to see through, did he sort of draw a red line for himself there in the Middle East?
Well, first of all, my guess is his prodding helped seal the deal here. It's obviously good news. It's good to see the violence cease. Hopefully that continues. But we need to see all the hostages released. We need to see all the hostages accounted for. It's going to be horrific to, learn the details. But again, in the end, it's good that we have a ceasefire here, and hopefully it will continue.
If it doesn't continue and the threat of all hell breaks loose, what do you think that looks like in a new Trump administration?
I can't predict, but again, from my standpoint, Israel has the right to defend itself. That's my big concern. I'm hoping they weren't coerced into a deal before they finished what they needed to finish, which was the destruction of Hamas, so that Hamas can't rise again and threaten them again in a few years. So, again, in the end, it's really up to Israel. Is this something they can live with? And we have to support them.
You've been making some news in the last 24 hours or so, Senator, because as we continue to keep our eyes on Southern California, the devastation there, the wind warnings are extended there in Los Angeles and Ventura counties. You are among the group of Republicans that are making the case that any aid should be paid for. Explain why. Why is that your position, Senator?
Because we're $36.3 trillion in debt. We've gone from $4.4 trillion of spending in 2019 to averaging 6.5 over the last 5 years, and now we're spending $7 trillion. And most people in Congress don't even realize that total amount. I've been revealing it to them. I think they're shocked. We don't have the money.
What do you mean they don't know the amount? Members of Congress don't know that amount that you talk to?
I asked 3 years ago, hey, anybody know how much we spent last year?
The Washington media didn't know, and most of my colleagues, I don't think, knew either, because we never talk about it. All we allocate, all we appropriate is about less than 30% of the federal budget. Everything else is on automatic pilot, which is exactly what the Uniparty has done. They transferred what should be discretionary spending into mandatory, so we never have to consider it, and it runs out of control. That's why we're $36 trillion plus in debt.
But why conditions, Senator? I'm from Florida, right? So I know a thing or two about hurricanes. I was born and raised there, and I'm looking at government along the Gulf Coast, Florida, Republican governor, all Republicans in the state house there. Same for Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas. That's the entire Gulf Coast. And if you open up the door, Senator, of we need to attach conditions unless California does X, doesn't that open up the door down the line in the God forbid when a storm rips through the southeast there? Couldn't Democrats come and say, you know what, Republicans need to do Y?
What we've opened up the door to is moral hazard, where we assume the risk that property owners ought to be assuming themselves, that insurance companies can price insurance properly so that people don't build multi-million, multi-billion-dollar structures in places that are going to be hit by floods or hurricanes or wildfires. The more we learn about California, this was not only predictable, it was predicted in early January, and they did nothing about it. So if it was predictable, it could be prevented. They didn't do it. So this tragedy, the tragic loss of life, the billions of dollars of property damage was all preventable, should have been prevented, but it wasn't because of horrific mismanagement and misgovernance on the part of the Democrats in California.
You have no worries, though, that this opens the door on the other side.
No, we have to stop this moral hazard. If Californians come crawling to the federal government, to American taxpayers to bail them out, the minimum we should expect is they clean up their act and start governing themselves properly. Great op-ed in the Wall Street Journal talking about how at the start of the last century, about 4.5 million acres of California was burned annually. Then they mitigated it, got that down to 250,000 acres. It's back up to 4.5 million because of extreme environmentalists spending billions of dollars on climate change, and then they're trying to blame that as opposed to their own mismanagement. This was caused by mismanagement, horrific governance.
Got to leave it there. Senator Ron Johnson, Republican of Wisconsin. Thanks for being back with us here on The Hill. Appreciate it.
Have a good evening.
You too. Joining me now, Mick Mulvaney, former Trump White House Chief of Staff, NewsNation contributor, Julia Manchester, national political reporter for TheHill.com. I want to get to this sort of unusual and very unique moment that we're in right now, which we saw play out today really all over the world. What about that, though? Because, again, I'm looking at Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas. Hurricanes are coming there, and those are Republican-controlled. And, Mick, I just wonder, when you open up the door and say, the Democrats in California, can I flip it on you and say, well, what about those Republicans in those states?
He's not wrong. The question is, where was that conversation when we had this bailout of Superstorm Sandy or Katrina or Maria, or go down the list? Why start with California? It's going to look like it's entirely political. Is it the right conversation to have? Yes. Is it late to be having it? Absolutely. You sort of hope they come to an agreement that says, look, going forward, this is what we're going to do, so you treat every state similarly. Okay. I'm not sure that's going to happen. But keep in mind, we did put conditions on all sorts of different places. We put conditions on Superstorm Sandy, had to raise it a little bit, had to raise...
all the coastal areas. They're all trying to do stuff in one form or another.
What's wrong with putting a condition on California? It says, okay, we'll give you money, but when you build stuff back, it has to be more fire preventive. That's not a bad condition.
We are in a very unique moment right now. This is 5 days left of one presidency, 5 days until another. And we saw today, Julia, sort of both Donald Trump and President Biden's administrations come together on this hostage deal.
You have one door closing on the Biden administration. Joe Biden obviously going to seek to make this a major part of his legacy, but Donald Trump going to do the same thing as the door is opening on his second administration. Remember, I think you're going to see Donald Trump really, try to vocalize, obviously, his administration's support for Israel going forward. There are questions about what the future of Gaza will be, what the future of the U.S.'s role in the UN will be. Elise Stefanik is likely going to be a very different ambassador than Linda Thomas-Greenfield. She's going to be, I think, much more aggressive in terms of expressing what the Trump administration wants going forward, maybe harder on the United Nations in any way. So it's going to be a different environment.
Real quick, what do you think Donald Trump's thinking tonight?
I think everybody's thinking the same thing, which is this is an encouraging start, but this is a long way from being finished. I mean, you're talking about several weeks, if not months, for the hostages to come home. It's still not entirely clear what the role of Hamas is going into Gaza. Part of me, and I don't want to be too cynical, is like the Biden team wanted to have something to say we did it on the way out the door, but I think this is a long way from being finished.
All right. Julia, Mick, thank you both. Appreciate it. Still to come here on the Hill. The hostage deal, will it be seen through? I'll talk live with the parents of an American held hostage who are still grieving the unimaginable. Plus, the dangerous wind warnings in Southern California. We're taking you live to the front lines in L.A. And the president's farewell address from the White House, less than 2 hours away. You can watch it right here on NewsNation, 8 o'clock Eastern. Welcome to Washington. I'm Blake Berman. This is the center of politics, and you're watching The Hill on NewsNation. On NewsNation today, a historic ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. After more than 15 months after the October 7th, 2023 attacks from Hamas. The deal will bring 33 hostages home in 3 phases. Ronan and Orna Nutra have been among the biggest advocates for a hostage deal. Their son, Omer, was one of the Americans being held by Hamas. The Nutras told their son's story at the Republican National Convention in July, later meeting with President Biden at the White House. Just last month, the IDF confirmed their worst fears. Their 21-year-old son, presumed to be dead. Ronan and Orna Nutra join us live here on the Hill. Thank you both for being with us tonight. Appreciate your time. I can't imagine what's going through your mind right now. Obviously, President Biden celebrating this, President-elect Trump celebrating this. What is this moment like for you right now? And when you learned of the news, what were your first thoughts?
Mixed emotions. Obviously, we've been anticipating this moment for such a long time, since the last deal in late November 2023. We haven't had any hostages brought back through an agreement. And we've been advocating and fighting for this agreement, for this deal since then. Obviously, for us personally, the feeling is bittersweet because, for 422 days, we were fighting to bring our beloved son back home alive. And on day 422, we were notified that he's no longer among the living. And our fight has changed. But we're still in it. It's not over.
Yeah.
We've been in it since October 7th, and until we bring him back for proper burial, which he deserves, an honorable burial, then we can't rest.
Do you, Ronan, do you believe that Hamas will see this through?
Listen, this is a deal with the devil. This is not a good deal. But on October 7, 2023, they took 250 people out of the beds, and people and soldiers like our son, a first responder, rushed to the border to try and defend the villages. And unfortunately, we have to do a deal with the devil. We believe that President Trump's strong statements and helped bring us to this point after a long, hard work of the Biden administration. And we are at the point where this deal can go through, but it really depends on both parties, the Netanyahu government and Hamas. And of course, Hamas is a terrorist group, and we need to make sure that this deal goes through because we want our son back. It's the first stage that this deal is right now signed for is for only 33 hostages.
Yeah,
there are remaining hostages, and the total number is 98, among them our son. And we feel, as Orna said, that if he deserves, as a first responder, a proper burial, and we need to have closure.
So we're in this really unique moment right now because it's 5 days left of the Biden presidency, and then right after that, of course, 4 years of the Trump presidency, and it will be the Trump administration who will then take the lead on overseeing sort of the implementation of this deal. What would your message be, Ronan and Orna, for the incoming commander-in-chief, Donald Trump?
You know, the moment we heard the conclusion, you know, the way the elections were decided, we immediately met with Jake Sullivan from the National Security Advising Team for President Biden, and our first request was, please reach out to the Trump team, bring them in, and start working with them immediately. Don't wait until January 20th.
Right.
And the next day, we heard from President Biden that that's exactly what he did in his meeting with President Trump. And we know from both sides that they've been working together, that there's no daylight between the two teams. And President Trump's team has been very involved in pushing for this deal as well, and they're completely on board. And we have to have full trust in the new team that they will carry this through. All three phases. It's not an easy deal. It's not a simple deal.
Yeah.
And all parties are going to have to be held accountable.
And we're incredibly thankful. I mean, we don't take it for granted. It's been a lot of hard work for a lot of good people. And we're very thrilled that we reached this moment, but it's not over until it's over. And we won't have some.
Yeah, not over until it's over. As a parent, I could only imagine. Ronan and Orna Nutra, thank you for being with us tonight, sharing part of your story. I wish you all the best and hope to talk to you again soon. Thank you both.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right. Our coverage continues here on NewsNation and on the Hill. On the other side of the break, as our eyes continue to stay in Southern California and the ongoing fires there, just 19% contained in the Palisades. Stay with us here on NewsNation. The Hill returns in a few. Welcome back here to the Hill on NewsNation. I'm Blake Berman. The devastation now in its second week in California. Crews working tirelessly to try to contain the wildfires there, but strong wind gusts are expected to stay. 6:30 here on the East Coast, 3:30 out west, and here's what we know at this hour. More than 40,000 acres have burned. More than 80,000 residents remain under evacuation orders. At least 25 people are dead. Dozens remain missing, and officials warn of dangerous winds to come. Our Brian Enton is live in Malibu with the very latest. Brian, it's like the juxtaposition behind you, Malibu, the beautiful ocean. I see a multi-million-dollar home, and I'm sure you're going to talk about a lot of devastation.
Yeah, it's so weird driving through Malibu. You think about all the fancy TV shows and movies and when you're here on vacation, and you've still got a couple of homes standing like the one behind me, but next to it, then you've got like 12 or 13 houses that are just totally gone. And we learned from firefighters, you know, these homes stick out over the ocean. The fire was actually spreading underneath the houses, which they didn't realize at first. They were putting water on the top of the houses and then realizing that the fire was actually spreading beneath them. In terms of the death toll, it's now up to 24 people expected to rise. There's still dozens of people who are missing, Blake, and they're doing these grid searches, going to all of the homes that burned down and searching and at times finding human remains, and that's why we see the death number going up. In terms of the winds, better than expected. Look, there were the warnings 50, 60 miles per hour. We haven't seen them. Yes, there's been some big gusts up in the canyons, but for the most part, it hasn't been as bad as the firefighters expected. The red flag warning still in effect, though, for a couple more hours. Blake?
A little bit of good news there. Brian Enton live for us in Malibu. Brian, thank you. Joining me now is the Democratic congressman from California, Southern California, Salud Carbajal. His district is just north of Los Angeles there in Ventura County, one of the areas under watch tonight. Congressman, thanks for being with us this evening. What's your main worry there back home?
Well, obviously, the main worry is containing this fire. The disaster is ensuing, and people continue to be threatened, their properties threatened. So the first order of business is to contain this fire, and our first responders are doing a heroic job trying to get their hands around it.
The first responders doing a heroic job, and FEMA is overwhelmed, to put it mildly. I spoke with your colleague, Congresswoman Judy Chu. She represents the Altadena area, just southeast of you, and that's the Eaton fire. Here's what she told me last night, Congressman. I'll get your reaction on the other side.
there's nothing worse after your life has been devastated. You're not at your home. You're trying to recover. And then you get a non-approval message in error. That's not right.
She says she knows of many stories of FEMA just not approving folks who deserve to be approved and should be approved. Why is that happening? Do you have any answers there in the California delegation?
Having gone through major disasters, fire disasters in my district, I know it is not always a streamlined, easy process. And certainly FEMA can and should do better. But this is the nature of responding to disasters. And I'm hopeful that they will do better in the future because people's livelihoods are at stake. People have lost loved ones. And we need to do better to make sure they get the assistance and the aid.
I hear you, Congressman, but when you say that this has happened in the past and we know what's happening now and they should do better in the future, why just aren't they doing better now?
Well, they should, period. FEMA should be doing and executing as best as they can. And there's no excuse for not executing at the highest level possible to assist these families that have gone through this trauma and are still going through this trauma.
What are you going to tell the incoming Trump administration?
Well, I'm going to tell the incoming Trump administration to first stop playing politics with the disaster aid, as he has already started to do. We have never played politics with aiding those that have gone and experienced deadly, disastrous natural disasters in our country, whether it's Florida, Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma. We've always stepped up, and we never played games. And to start doing that would be outrageous, unconscionable, and precedent-setting. We need to make sure that we help all Americans.
And what if they do? I mean, the reality is they control Washington, right? Or will come Monday afternoon. And so if they do want conditions attached to it, would you listen? Or that's just a non-starter?
I would always listen. But first, what are the proposals? What's being put on the table? And first and foremost, we got to get beyond this divisive political rhetoric and put forward proposals that are really, regarding the disaster aid, that's really going to help these families that have lost their livelihoods and lost loved ones. That's the first order of business.
Congressman Carbajal, he is from Ventura County, which is being watched over tonight carefully, as you might imagine. Thanks for being with us tonight here on the Hill. Appreciate it, sir.
Thank you very much.
You got it. All right. So amid the debate over the federal response, federal aid, you just heard some of it there, Los Angeles is facing its third consecutive day of strong winds, making containment efforts even more challenging. Joining us now is the former director of CAL FIRE, Ken Pimlott. He led the agency for more than 14 years. There's some of the worst fires in the state's history. Ken, thanks for being with us tonight. Help me through this at just a basic level. This is 8 days. I've been watching this fire, as most of the country, or a lot of the country has, for 8 days. And I'm looking at 19% contained and 40-something% contained. How?
You know, again, thank you for having me on. This is well beyond what we would consider just a forest or vegetation fire. This is an urban conflagration. And the containment isn't just literally putting a line around a brush or forest vegetation or around the burn. This is literally mopping up home after home. You've seen the devastation. We have, over 10,000 homes destroyed. Each and every one of those is burning. It's got hazardous material. All of it's presenting challenges to firefighters. So the mop-up is much more challenging and difficult, and every one of those homes creates new embers and sparks that with the wind can blow over the containment lines and escape or start new fires. And so containment is very methodical and very tedious on this kind of a fire.
So methodical, tedious, 40,000 combined acres, Ken, and just between the Palisades and the Eaton fire. And as I mentioned, you were in charge of this thing for a decade and a half. What's your best guess is when we can sit there and say, you know what, this is over?
It will be weeks. While the main fire movement is died down, we're not seeing the active fire, but the real threat is still there in terms of again, really truly being comfortable that the fire can be contained and not escape that. And we've seen in the forecast, there's even now the potential for Santa Ana winds to return next week. And even without the winds, Southern California is in critically dry condition. It's had less than a tenth of an inch of rain this rainfall season. It is fire season for the foreseeable future.
Ken, you probably heard a little bit of that interview before you with the congressman. There's this debate that's starting to take place in Washington right now with most likely a massive federal aid package at some point coming to California. And there's talks on one side of the aisle about we need to attach conditions because of the way things have been handled. There's talks on the other side of the aisle. How could you do this? We've never stipulated conditions for stuff like this. As those debates happen, whatever side of the thinking you're on, that it's a good idea or not, what do you think Washington needs to know about preventing and taking on wildfires in your state going forward?
Absolutely. And California is no different than many of the other states in the western United States. We're all facing the same challenging, changing weather conditions that are absolutely driving fires to be much more extreme. Right now, we all, regardless of the level of government or organization, our focus really needs to continue to be taking care of the people in these communities. Now is the most challenging time. The residents, the adrenaline's wearing off. These residents have been out of their homes for over a week, and they're starting to really feel the grief and the anxiety to get back in or to see what they've lost, and then what's next. And so it's really now the most critical point in these fires is how we transition from the firefight to taking care of the community and the recovery. And that's a long process over the next several years to truly have these communities recover and take care of those people. And that needs to continue to be our focus for the long haul.
Ken Pimlott, you might have seen him on Netflix. He's a pro and an expert on this topic, joining us live here on The Hill. Thank you for your perspective, Ken. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
You got it. All right, still to come here from The Hill. Israel, Hamas agreeing to that hostage and ceasefire deal. So what happens next? And live pictures from the White House. President Biden's farewell address an hour and 20 minutes from now. Full panel. Other side of the break, including what Mick Mulvaney wrote in The Hill today and an idea that he has for both sides of the aisle.
Don Jr., his son, very loyal to him, said, I have never in my entire life heard my father admit to a mistake. A big NewsNation special coming up. I will give you inside stuff you have never heard about the president.
For this, Mr. President, you or Trump?
Is that a joke? Oh, thank you.
All right, welcome back. Here to The Hill. That, of course, President Biden firing back today at a reporter following his remarks on the Israel-Hamas ceasefire and hostage deal. This after President-elect Trump took credit for the agreement announced earlier. Trump posting, quote, we have achieved so much without even being in the White House. Just imagine all of the wonderful things that will happen when I return. Full panel here with me now. Mick Mulvaney, former chief of staff in the Trump administration, NewsNation contributor. Julia Manchester, national political reporter for TheHill.com. Kelly Meyer of Kelly and the Capitol fame, Washington correspondent as well. Kurt Bardella, NewsNation contributor, Democratic strategist.
Kurt in the Capitol too? Kurt?
No, not yet.
No, I'm not cool enough.
Hello to you all. So, look, 5 days left of the Biden administration. This gets announced today. I also heard Donald Trump last week at some point, or in the last couple of weeks, say this.
If they're not back by the time I get into office, all hell will break out in the Middle East.
Mick, is this a reaction to Trump that it's happening now? Is this the Biden and incoming Trump administrations working together, or a little bit of both?
Why can't it be a little bit of both? I mean, why can't it be the Biden team actually doing the work with Trump sitting in the background going, you know what? Things are getting ready to change, and you know they are. You better cut a deal now. I mean, why can't both of them have some impact on the outcome?
This is like a plot, literally, from the West Wing transition episode, where the incoming president, Matthew Santos, pretends he's going to be crazy so Jed Bartlett can broker a peace deal. This is exactly what this is. It's exactly what it looks like.
The reality, though, is now the Trump administration is going to be the ones overseeing this, and Donald Trump has made a pretty big threat. Like, when you say, if this doesn't happen, you know, all hell's going to break loose, is that a red line? What happens if it doesn't get carried out to the end?
Well, look, we don't know what's going to happen, and he has a pretty tall order ahead of him. Look, Mick mentioned earlier in the show, we don't know what role Hamas is going to play. I mean, in the streets of Gaza today, you heard Palestinians chanting Hamas, talking about Yahya Sinwar. Clearly, there is, clearly an attachment to that organization there.
Foreign terrorist organization.
And the Netanyahu government hasn't given full blessing to this thing.
Exactly. And then on top of that, you also have the rebuilding of Gaza. What does that look like? And you also have the people, the Palestinian people, who have been bombarded for a year and a half. You got to question, how they're going to react to this. Do they end up siding with the Hamas and wanting to go along with that organization? Because they clearly or probably don't feel great about working with Israel.
There was I don't want to say testy, interesting moment in the White House press briefing today. You were there. Tell me about it.
Yeah, and I was going to say one of the questions, too, was just if the ceasefire will last, because we've seen it not last before. But in the briefing, Karine Jean-Pierre kept being pressed when I was there on if Trump should get some credit. So it quickly became not so much about the ceasefire and hostage deal, but who's getting credit for this and the tit for tat. She really hesitated to say that President-elect Trump should get credit. She kept coming back to, well, this is the framework that President Biden brought to the table in May.
State Department was pretty clear, though, that...
And she was asked about that moment, exactly, that State Department spokesperson Matt Miller said Trump should get credit for this. And she was asked about that, and she said, well, I don't know who said that. And they were like, it was Matt Miller. You know Matt Miller. And she said, oh, well, they don't speak for the president, but they kind of do because they also represent the administration. So she really wouldn't touch on that. And I wanted to ask her, yes, we all agree that the framework was Biden's. We see that. But is it fair to say that with Trump coming in, would it have still happened if he didn't? And that question wasn't answered.
All right. Meantime, on Monday, Donald Trump, the inauguration of the 47th president of the United States, and President Biden's term will end. The president, though, staying busy in his term's final days. Mick, you wrote an op-ed in thehill.com about it today. Mulvaney writes, quote, Biden is using his remaining time in office to give the country what it rejected. What do you mean?
Well, I talked about some of the stuff he's done. He took a bunch of the offshore leases off the market. He cut a deal with federal workers to let them stay home for the next 5 years. It's unclear if Trump will be able to do that. But my point in writing the article was this, is that nothing unites this town like uniting the House and the Senate against the White House. So what I think you're going to see now is a bipartisan discussion about whether or not that Congress should try to limit the authority of the president during this lame duck period. They've already done it in the past. They've limited the president's ability, for example, to do special envoys, one of the positions I used to hold.
Is this legal, though?
We're going to find out, right? But the point of the matter is that the Republicans don't like what Biden is doing in his last days, and the Democrats certainly are not going to like what Trump does in his last days. Sure, you can do small stuff, you do your pardons, that's great, but maybe there's a discussion this town. You can't do really meaningful stuff when you're no longer accountable to the vote.
You with Mulvaney here?
Oh, absolutely. I think that it's awkward that we have this long extended period of time where one president is a lame duck. The voters have selected a new leader that they've decided this is who should be the chief executive of America. There should be kind of a deferential, my time is now done. The people have spoken. Respecting the will of the people means living up to that. And I agree. You should overreach.
Can I say, wait a minute, though, they were elected for 48 months, not 46?
Yeah, I mean, again, constitutionally speaking, legally speaking, that's absolutely correct. That's why you can issue, President Biden can, on the last minute of his office, sign a pardon for somebody, and that would be completely valid and within his authority. But again, I think that when you do these things and you do overreach, it does backfire and creates backlash against you.
And President-elect Trump, is already thinking about doing an executive order for TikTok when he comes into office. So I think, isn't this just how Washington works? Democrats do something, Republicans hate it, and then Republicans or Democrats do the same thing, and then they all,
It is, but to Kurt's point, there's this unique period of time. By the way, other governments don't do it. When you win an election for the Prime Minister in the UK, for example, you take over the next morning. There is no transition period, and maybe the transition period is simply too long. Yes, it could be 48 months, but why does it have to be 48 months from January to January? Why can't it be from December 1st to December 1st?
Show the op-ed again real quick if we can. It's in thehill.com. Mulvaney writes, Biden is using his remaining time in office to give the country what it rejected.
Like a ceasefire deal.
You can check it out there. Live pictures of the White House if we can, because President Biden is expected to give his going away speech to the nation in about 1 hour and 8 minutes. national political reporter for thehill.com. We expect what tonight out of him?
Look, I mean, this is going to cement his legacy. I imagine we're going to hear quite a bit about the hostage deal. That's obviously a big deal. You're going to hear a lot about his legislative achievements. You heard quite a bit about that from Kamala Harris during the campaign. They've talked about how effective of a president he's been coming out of COVID. I mean, there's a lot of time to cover. It's been a tumultuous 4 years. Remember, he took office shortly after January 6th, 2021, towards the end of COVID. He's likely going to talk about how there was some sort of rebuilding, obviously, from then to now. So expect to hear that. Expect to hear a show of unity as well. I think obviously there's political differences with Trump, but I would imagine that Biden might want to end on a more positive note.
And this is something that President Biden isn't used to doing, saying goodbye. I mean, he's been serving in public office for nearly 50 years, county council, senator, vice president, president. So I think when I was talking with White House officials today at the White House, they were saying basically it's going to be kind of a positive tone, talking about the moment we're in, again, stronger together, and saying goodbye.
All right. Thank y'all. Appreciate it. Still to come here on the Hill. He won 10 Olympic gold medals, but they were all destroyed in the Los Angeles fires. So what do you think happened next? Leland Vitter, host of On Balance, joins me. Stay with us. Hill on NewsNation. The former U.S. Olympic swimmer Gary Hall Jr. is among California wildfire victims. Hall lost his home, all of his belongings with it, including 10 Olympic medals. Well, now the International Olympic Committee has announced it will replace the medals he won throughout his career from 1996 to 2004, which include 5 gold, 3 silver, 2 bronze medals. Joining me now, Leland Vitter, host of On Balance. Today was one of those days, Leland. You've got the farewell address of the president, these wildfires that we continue to cover out west, the hostage ceasefire agreement as we know it in the Middle East. We haven't even talked about TikTok yet, which is on the phones of half of the country, and TikTok basically saying they are they're going to shut it down here on Sunday, and you've got Markwayne Mullin coming.
Markwayne Mullin, senator from Oklahoma, has been very outspoken about TikTok, Republican senator, about the dangers of it. And look, Donald Trump has said he has a soft spot for TikTok, so I don't know if the senator is watching, but one of the questions is going to be, should Donald Trump have a soft spot for TikTok? And the Chinese are making move after move to basically prove what everyone's saying, that this is much more about a information play and propaganda play in the United States in controlling the algorithm than it ever was about a business.
I asked Trump in the briefing room way back when, before the 2020 election, about when are you going to have it? Is the election going to influence your decision on TikTok? And it said something like, we're going to have a decision soon, or something like that. Here we are, 5 years later, still talking about it, but on Sunday.
Welcome to covering Donald Trump. You just went through all the list of things going on.
We'll leave it there. Have a great show, brother.
All right, here we go.
See ya.